Mic check 1 2, testing 1 2. Mic check 1 2.
Iminatranchai the legislature in Guahan is called to order. Mr. Majority Leader, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Notwithstanding the House rules, I move to waive agenda items 1 through 13. One moment, please. I apologize. Yes. Thank you, colleagues, for pointing out my mistake. Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the House rules, I move to adopt today's legislative session agenda dated 7 June 2017.
A motion has been made, notwithstanding the House rules, to adopt today's legislative session agenda dated June 7, 2017. Are there any objections? Hearing no objections, so ordered. Can I ask Senator Mary Camacho Torres to lead us in prayer, and then Senator Regine Bisco Lee will do the Milazan and the Antifrasi, and Senator Estevez the Guam hymn, and Senator San Augustine the national anthem.
If you can all stand and bow your head in prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the gift of life. We thank you for the privilege to be here today to serve as elected officials of this wonderful island. It is said that the choices that we make show far more who we are than the actions that we take as individuals. We ask you, dear Lord, to grant us the humility to choose what is good for the greater of our island. We pray that you grant us the humility to choose what is truly best for the greater good, the strength to make the decisions that may be unpopular for the day. And mostly, dear Lord, we ask you to guide us and give us the wisdom so that we may continue to do your will. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
On behalf of a grateful island and country, we honor United States Navy Steward's Mate, 3rd Class Petty Officer Vicente Regis Ekfaji, and the family of Petty Officer Vicente Regis Ekfaji for making the ultimate sacrifice in 1944 during World War II in service and defense of our island and our country. Inifresi, gininimastakulu ginasoku, imastakulun gikurasonhu, zanimasfigu, naninasinyahu, hu ufresin maisadu, parabai putehi, zani defendi, ihinengi, ikutura, ilengwahi, iaidi, ihanum, zanitanu samoru. Niren saku diretsu gininasdu sata, estihu fitma gihilui Biblia, zani banderahu, ibanderan guahan.
Fanogi chamoru ulitanota kansai matsunan yagitoru ilugar parari honra parari gloria habibari isla semparari.
Mr. Majority Leader, you're recognized. Oh, I'm sorry, roll call.
Senator Addo. Senator Uggan. Senator Castro. Speaker Cruz. Senator Espadon. Senator Esteves. Senator Lee. Senator Morrison. Senator Muñoz. Senator Nelson. Senator Rodriguez. Senator San Augustine. Senator San Nicolas. Vice Speaker Terlahi. Senator Torres. Mr. Speaker, there is a quorum.
Mr. Majority Leader, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the House rules, I move to waive agenda items 8 through 13.
Motion has been made to waive agenda items 8 through 13. Are there any objections? Hearing none, so moved.
Mr. Speaker, I move that all congratulatory, commendatory, and condolence resolutions and legislative certificates introduced today and for the remainder of this legislative session be considered first read and adopted to allow the legal counsel to make technical corrections and to add all senators as co-sponsors.
Hearing no objections, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the objections of Imagalahin Guahan, I move to place Bill 58-34, COR, into the voting file, and I would like to discuss it.
You may proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker and colleagues, I stand before you to seek your favorable consideration for the override of the Governor's veto of Bill 58-34, a bill pertaining to the solicitation for a financed, designed, constructed, and equipped high school facility, and which shall be maintained and insured during the 30-year leaseback term. By overriding the veto, the legislature can facilitate the timely closure to the ongoing delay in the award of this solicitation by eliminating the conflicting language in Public Law 32-120 and requiring that the solicitation be made pursuant to Guam's procurement law. Second, the state of disrepair of GDOE's school facilities, Simon Sanchez in particular, threatens the health and safety of the students, teachers, and staff each day that they occupy these facilities. In addressing this critical challenge, cost is an essential factor. Contrary to what GDOE stated in its January 6, 2017 letter to the governor, that cost should not be the sole determining factor. It is undeniable that our government faces severe fiscal challenges. Therefore, it is imperative that the most economical annual leaseback cost for a new Simon Sanchez High School be of paramount importance in order to achieve greater savings that can then be used to repair our other schools. The least cost objective can best be attained through a competitive invitation for bid solicitation versus the request for proposal solicitation method, which is currently mandated by Public Law 32-120. Information that has become available over the past 12 months suggests that a price differential of about $15 million in construction costs could be realized if more competition is allowed to occur. The savings will ultimately result in lower annual rent payments. In response to the question as to why a price cap was not placed on how much could be spent for the construction of Simon Sanchez High School, I assert that the competition afforded by the invitation for bid process will yield better prices that reflect market forces and rather than that which is obtained from a single offerer, as would be the case in the request for proposal process. And if the price for Simon Sanchez High School turns out higher than can be tolerated because GDOE wants to ensure that adequate funds are available for the repair of other schools, GDOE will then have to reassess its specifications. In his veto message of Bill 411-33, a bill similar to Bill 58-33, the governor asserted that by mandating a specific solicitation method, i.e. the multi-step competitive seal bid, this would be a violation of the separation of powers doctrine. Hence, the violation would make the bill inorganic and unconstitutional. Using the same logic that the governor used to veto Bill 411-33, in that case then Public Law 32-120 would then also be inorganic and unconstitutional because the legislature had mandated in that public law the use of a specific solicitation method and could very well be used as a basis for another protest. Bill 58 would eliminate this peculiarity by simply requiring that the Guam procurement law be followed. And the Guam procurement law lays out that when you are soliciting for professional services, then the request for proposal process is the method to be used unless authorized by law. But this governor says we should not tell him what solicitation method to use. So we're going to remove that in Bill 58. And in procurement law, it says that for construction services and for supplies and services, then the invitation for bid is the preferred method. The governor cited that award should be made as stipulated in Public Law 32-120, which reads, based upon the proposal that delivers the best value for Guam in meeting the objectives of the education agency. And he further noted that this is a sound policy decision. I would contend that this statement is nebulous and vague at best. We need to cut through the chase and simply state that an award should be made to the bidder who can provide a school facility that meets DOE's specifications and offers the lowest annual lease back rent. I want a certain type of school, and if you can provide that, I will award it to the bidder that offers it at the lowest annual lease back rent. The governor further contends that changing the solicitation process will require the government to start the process all over again from the very beginning. While it is true that there will have to be some modifications, I would say that 90% of the work has already been done and will not be changed. DOE's specifications of what it wants for an education facility remains the same. The submittal requirements from the bidders in terms of documentation that's required, in terms of information that's required, will not change. The evaluation criteria will remain the same. It is incomprehensible why he would say that a change in solicitation method will cost millions of dollars in time and resources. The major difference would be that GDOE, to its benefit, can negotiate with all participating bidders who have submitted acceptable, unpriced technical proposals. Under the current RFP process, GDOE has not had the benefit of discussing the proposals of the other bidders who have submitted proposals. Let me just explain briefly the difference between the two methods. So they put out a solicitation that says we are looking for a bidder who can provide an education facility that meets these specifications, and we will award it to the lowest, the bidder that will provide the facility at the lowest annual leaseback rate. Under the RFP, those proposals that are received are evaluated, and they are ranked. So ranked number 1, 2, 3. Under the RFP process, we then tell number 2 and number 3, go and take a seat, and we'll call you when we need you. We call in number 1, and we sit down and we negotiate with them to come to an agreement as to what they will give us and for what price. So basically, we get the benefit only of what is being offered from that one offerer. In the invitation for bid process, the same thing happens. We send out that solicitation telling them what we want. They submit their proposals. And then, at that time, we evaluate, just as we did in the RFP, those proposals. And again, we determine, the only difference is that now instead of ranking them as most qualified, qualified, not qualified, in the invitation for bid, we evaluate the proposals and to determine which proposals are acceptable, which proposals are somewhat acceptable, and which proposals are not acceptable. The process then allows us to sit down with each of those offerers who have submitted proposals that are acceptable or possibly acceptable. And we can sit down and say, well, what did you mean by this? Maybe you misunderstood what I wanted. And then they can basically negotiate with each of those offerers. And then after that initial negotiation is done up front, this is on the unpriced technical offer, then we sit down and say, okay guys, the proposal, the facility that you are proposing all meets my requirements. The difference now is submit your price proposal, and the award will be made to the bidder with the lowest price. And so obviously the bidders, through this competitive process, are going to do their best to provide the lowest price. Granted, each of the bidders, the cost of building that facility, the labor and the materials will probably be the same, because the cost of a 2x4 lumber to company 1, 2, or 3 will be the same regardless. Where the difference is how much profit margin am I willing to live with? How good of a financing rate can I get out there on the market to be able to finance this project? So that's where the differences come in. How much am I going to charge for the architectural and engineering work that comes with this project? And so I believe that through the invitation for bid, then we will, through the competitive forces, we will see the best price that's available on the market. And then the governor further states that by changing to a different solicitation method, there is no guarantee or mechanism to safeguard against future protests. It should be noted that vulnerability to a process is not related to the solicitation method. Instead, protests arise because provisions are inserted in the solicitation that is not allowed. For example, the last protest, the one that is currently under review by the public auditor, was because the solicitation included the repair, maintenance, and insurance of the 34 other schools, which was authorized under Public Law 32-121, at least for the 34 schools. But the inclusion of maintenance and insurance is contrary to the law. Yet it was put into the solicitation package. And the law further states that an RFP will not be issued or a solicitation will not be issued until a capital improvement plan has been completed. Well, a capital improvement plan has not even been done yet. And Public Law 32-121 very specifically says that until you have completed the capital improvement plan for those 34 schools, then that's when you go out and you solicit for the rehabilitation of the 34 schools. But it did not include ongoing maintenance for the next 30 years, and it did not include insurance for the next 30 years. To include that would definitely add tens of millions of dollars to the cost burden for GDOE. Another example of the sort of things that has been causing these protests is because of the language that is put into that was put into the solicitation packages. For example, the discussions initially was, what is the threshold? Is it, do we have up to $100 million to build a Simon Sanchez and to repair the 34 other schools? And finally, after the debate, somebody came out and says, yes, $30 or $100 million is the limit. That's the threshold. But there was this one phrase that was put in there that just derailed everything. It was a phrase that said, or at the discretion of the DPW director, which means that that gives him the authority to be able to exceed the $100 million. And that's what triggered a protest. So it's the gaming of the system that results in this procurement protest, not the solicitation method. I remain confident that Bill 58-34, if enacted, can break the deadlock that Simon Sanchez has been mired in. And I am confident that we can get an affordable Simon Sanchez High School that will meet the needs of GDOE and its students. But before I close, Mr. Speaker, I would like to just comment. I haven't seen the letter yet. Maybe it's here. But the governor, I guess, has written a letter to the public auditor asking or has asking the AG to, hey, just put aside these protests and make an award based on substantial interest. I find that interesting because at least in the procurement law, I've never seen that as a basis for just putting everything aside and making an award. The provision in the procurement law that allows that is if the governor declares an emergency. Now, the fact that there was poor prior planning, lack of prior planning to address the deficiencies at Simon Sanchez and our other schools, is that to be deemed as now an emergency? And so I would disagree with this thing about just, never mind the rules, never mind what the law says, just make an award. I guess make an award to the guy that was deemed to be most qualified. So this is another way of trying to get a square peg pushed in to fit into a round pork barrel. And so, Mr. Speaker and my colleagues, I realized before the session started there was a lot of questions asked because there's, there seems to be this, oh my God, we've been trying this for 36 months and now we're going to change it. Well, I shared the same sort of anxieties that you have, but I also went back and I read what the protests have, what does the procurement law say, and I'm confident that Bill 58 will break this deadlock and we can get moving forward if that is also what the administration wants to do. In fact, I'm confident enough in what Bill 58 will do. I am willing to put my career up front right now. Thank you, and I urge my colleagues to vote yes in overriding the veto. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
On the main motion, any senator wish to be heard? Any senator wish to be heard on Vice Speaker Terlahi and then Senator Uggan, then Senator Castro?
Buenas, Mr. Speaker and colleagues. I rise in support of the override. I've been a senator for exactly 5 months today. In these 5 months, the news regarding the procurement protests on the procurement process for Simon Sanchez have appeared in the PDN approximately 10 times. We've had hearings on several new ideas to redo the Simon Sanchez procurement that, according to the bills, will save money and save time. The following facts should be highlighted in our discussion today. Simon Sanchez has been in the news for unsafe conditions since 2010, thanks to the courageous advocacy of teachers, students, principals, and parents. The law authorizing the rebuilding of Simon Sanchez was passed in 2013, authorizing up to $101 million for Simon Sanchez and the repair of other schools. This law delegated to the Superintendent of DOE, DPW Director, Department of Land Management, EPA, and GIDA, Economic Development Authority, to be the decision-making authority as to how the contractor would be selected, the time period that would be demanded of the contractor, the specifications that the new school would contain, and the cost of the new school. In 2013, the governor authorized new offices be built for DOE at the cost of $126.3 million. $126.3 million is more than the $101 million reserved for rebuilding of Simon Sanchez, planning for the repair of and completion of the repair of the other schools combined. That office building is completed and it's beautiful. I invite all the public school teachers to drive past that building and then to drive further and see Teason High School down the street. And then to look at your own schools, be it Southern High, Simon Sanchez, GW, or Teason, or any of the numerous middle schools that were built in the 70s or 80s or even the 90s. I'm a parent, and that simple visual and the millions of dollars involved makes me furious. Yesterday, a teacher from Simon Sanchez testified that she had not had textbooks for 14 years, that her classroom size exceeded the authorized limits. Well, I would like to send a message to every teacher in the public schools in Guam. The current system of waiting, of playing along, believing that things will never get better, or that it's not up to you. This must stop. It is up to you and the system, and it's up to all of us. The system of leaving decisions that are affecting your classrooms and your students, to the administration at DOE must end. The government has not been able to alter that political balance between the needs of teachers and the politics of administrating the schools, despite years of revolving superintendents, law after law changing the composition of the boards or modifying the authority of the governor over education. I urge the teachers, the principals, and the parents to not any longer be distracted or lulled into abdicating the power that you as parents and principals and teachers wield. In the case of the rebuilding of Simon Sanchez, I have implored the GDOE management to take a stand on the rebuilding of Simon Sanchez by a faster and more cost-effective means. But I've been told they will not look or comment on any new proposal. They will not take ownership of the current proposal or the proposal that's being protested, saying that they have not been given the full authority as to how the new school should function, or that they did not have sole authority over that, and that it was not the right time. This is exactly the response the community received when the $126 million for T's and DOE offices were agreed to. No one representing you, parents, teachers, and principals at GDOE argued that the money should go instead to remedy your classroom safety issues, or go toward your books, or go toward teacher salaries. Your teachers and principals must insist that you represent yourselves and insist that your input is heard by your own management team. And I say to the parents that if the teachers are too overwhelmed to do this for you, then please help us to do it for your children. Tell DOE that enough is enough. We're having a budget hearing on GDOE tomorrow, Friday. I believe it's at 10 a.m. Everyone, the public, is welcome to these budget hearings. I particularly invite all the principals and parents to get copies of the GDOE budgets and ask how much is going to be allocated to remedy what you have seen firsthand is wrong with your child's school. Why were the repairs to Simon Sanchez not begun yet, when the citations were in the news since 2010, and the GDOE management estimates 18 more months of construction for the new school? Do not let the only voices in attendance at GDOE meetings or legislative budget hearings represent that new offices for GDOE central staff are the priority above safe schools. You have rightfully criticized the legislature and the governor for salary raises while school conditions remain unsafe. Do not accept that the government of Guam is incompetent at fixing your school or building a new school, or that the DOE, DPW, and the other agencies learned nothing from building Adakau or Liguan Elementary, Ukudu High School 2 times, and JFK. Help us to overcome the politics involved in this multi-million-dollar procurement. Together, we can speed up the completion of the new school. We can save millions, and we can use that instead on the repair of other schools, busing, in the creation of college scholarships. We can force GDOE to focus on hard decisions and schools first. I support the solution provided in Bill 58 for the timely and cost-efficient construction of Simon Sanchez, notwithstanding the governor's veto. I ask my colleagues to do the same, and I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice Speaker, for that very eloquent statement. Senator Will Castro.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Spend the most part of the beginning of this session listening to what some believe to be true. There are several claims and certain assertions that they're privy to. But what I know, as a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, is what the record reflects. It's 4 years later and there's still no school.
You know, it was even suggested earlier that it was admitted, for the record, that there'll be some modifications, which would also suggest further delay. There's no guarantee that the passage of 58 would expedite anything. In reflecting upon the discussion, I see a very clear pattern with this override, with other legislation I've seen come through, and it's that, at least I can see what's going on. There's a pattern in that we're not consulting the respective stakeholders. I'm aware that GDOE is opposed to the override. That's the affected stakeholder group. I'm also aware that the Simon Sanchez High School PTA is standing in opposition to the override. I'm also privy to communication that the mayor of the municipality of that affected constituency stands in opposition to the override. And then I also heard, as a planner, I'm a teacher by vocation, but having some experience in planning, that all this is because there's no CIP, there's no capital improvement plan. Then why are we even discussing this? If that's the case, face the Jigo community and tell them that we're not going to move forward because there's no capital improvement plan. What happened? 4 to 6 months in, no plan, and all of a sudden we want to overwrite this because there's no plan. Innuendo of politics, assertions of pork barrel. We spent 4 minutes to 8 minutes on the minutia, the peculiarities, the specificity of the mechanism. If we don't have faith in the system, then change the system, but not at the 11th hour. Exercise the power of oversight. Call in the responsible agencies whose job it is to make sure that there's no collusion, if that's what the concern is. Break the gridlock. Break the gridlock. I don't know about a gridlock. What I do know is, based on what I heard, do you want the CIP master plan? Are you calling into question the progress of the Jigo Communities High School because no CIP plan? Because you can't on one hand say we shouldn't move forward because there's no plan, and on the other hand say let's override it because we're gonna get there faster. Mr. Speaker, my qualm is not with the good chairman who's raising these issues. I think they're legitimate. My frustration, however, is not with the procurement mechanism. My only frustration, Mr. Speaker, is that 4 years later and we still don't have a school. And if there's even the slight possibility, just the slightest possibility, that this would further delay the procurement process, then again, for the record, I stand firmly in opposition to the override.
Thank you very much, Senator Castro. Senator Frank Duggan.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker and fellow colleagues. You know, I listened very intently to some of the comments that the sponsor of the legislation provided us. Historical information and then concerns with regards to the appeals. And then I stepped back and I asked myself, why are we really discussing Bill number 58-34? And it really boils down to a time when the students were extremely active in 2013. They invited the governor, the lieutenant governor, and members of this legislative body to visibly walk in the shoes of a shark. And Mr. Speaker, that was 3+ years ago. And here we are, turn the clock forward. What has been accomplished? Very little, if nothing at all, because of the appeals that have occurred with regards to compliance with law and with regards to the entire procurement process. You know, Mr. Speaker, in 2013, everyone that walked in the shoes of a shark during that invitation by the students and some of the teachers recognized that the school, not the students, not the teachers, not the administrators, but the school was sick and needed an immediate operation. And the solution was to look at the construction of a brand new Simon Sanchez High School. Mr. Speaker, that process started 3 years ago, 3+ years ago, in terms of the RFP going out, and since then we've had numerous appeals. As I look at this and I listen intently to the sponsor, where he mentioned that this would break the deadlock of the procurement appeals. Mr. Speaker, I certainly hope that his statement is true to form. Because now, rather than the concern that I had when this legislation was entertained, it's breaking that deadlock that is necessary for the students as well as the Simon Sanchez High School community. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, as you transition to Madam Speaker, we really, as a community, must move forward with the construction of the Simon Sanchez High School. And the underlying issue is because we owe it to the students, and we owe it to the Simon Sanchez High School community. But most importantly, we need to restore Simon Sanchez High School's community's trust in their government, that if there's a system or a portion of the procurement process that's broke, that the legislature would step in and fix it. Madam Speaker, I will be casting my vote in support of this override effort of Bill number 858, that's 34. We need to stop this process of appeals and move forward and give our students and the Simon Sanchez High School the opportunity and the hope that they will see their schools constructed and brand new in a few years. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Uggan. Senator San Nicolas, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, Madam Speaker, I almost was a teacher. I took a lot of courses at UOG. My wife is an educator. She was a teacher and an assistant principal. My parents were teachers and educators. I'm a product of the Guam public school system. And I've not only had the privilege of walking in the shoes of a shark, I actually did it firsthand. I was a teacher at Simon Sanchez High School. That was about 7 years ago. It feels like yesterday, though, because the problems then are the same problems today. The school should have been condemned back then, really. And here we are. And when I was listening to the author of the bill stand up and stake his career on this override, it gave me goosebumps, and it still hasn't really gone away. Because what he did in that statement was he put his career on the line, not for his bill, but for those students, for that entire community. And I was just going to be quiet and vote in favor of the override. But when I heard statements made about what the mayor wants, what the PTA is saying, what the department is saying, it's one thing for people to have an interest, whatever that interest may be, in the status quo. But if your constituents are hurting, when your students are hurting, when your community is hurting, and there's a solution that's available that someone is willing to stake their career on, you really have to give that serious consideration. This effort to fix the procurement problem and get Sanchez going is not an 11th hour effort. on the contrary. I've been here long enough to see this effort tried time and time and time again, and it's always been the same thing. Vetoes, and then protests. And it just strangely fits the same modus operandi where the crisis is created, it balloons up so much, and then all of a sudden urgent action must be taken that just so happens to fall favorably into a particular corner. And now the urgent action that's even being, as I'm speaking, emailed out by Adelup is now the AG is being called upon to just throw everything out and do it. And that, for me, kind of underscores the entire story. I've said it on this floor over the years, Madam Speaker, that more often than not, these circumstances that find ourselves in these crises that result in that kind of single-minded action, they're engineered, Madam Speaker. And for our students and the entire community that has been suffering under the Sanchez conditions for all these years to just be pawns in this big chess game of how am I going to get my hands on those resources is a tragic story of our island for a while now. At least since 2010. And we can go down the list of how many times we were all of a sudden faced with a crisis and then action was taken that just somehow constantly ratcheted up the scoreboard for a particular team. And I remember over the years, statesmen who have been here before, who have always gotten up and spoken the truth about the issues, and really tried, not necessarily to be oppositional, but just really tried to advocate for the best interests of the community. And today the author of this bill is doing just that, staking his career on that. And we really should not take that lightly. And we can no longer take the situation up at Simon Sanchez lightly. You know, the last time we passed something to try and move Sanchez forward was the same time that we passed something to move this building forward. This building didn't even have walls. You couldn't even be in here. There was a fence around it. And now here we are. And Sanchez still hasn't gone anywhere. And the only difference between the two efforts was that one had roadblocks and the other didn't. And these roadblocks are by design. Because look at what happens when there are none. And so, you know, when faced with that reality and faced with the question of overriding this bill, and faced with the reality that people are willing to put their careers on the line for us to just do this, then I implore this body, let's do this. Let's override this veto. Let's get it done for that community. Let's demonstrate to our constituents and to this island that La Legislatura really did everything it could to get this problem resolved. Our students and the faculty and staff have no business spending one more day on that campus. The sooner we can resolve this procurement issue to get their new school going, that's one less day that they're going to have to be faced with the prospects of walking back through those doors. I've already lost count of how many graduating classes have started their school year careers up there and ended them with the hope and then the disappointment of a new school finally breaking ground. And while a retiring speaker may say that the education officials don't want this, how can you look all those students in the eye and say, we welcomed you into high school and then we graduated you and we just disappointed you? But we're not going to make this effort. Simon Sanchez has become a symbol, a greater symbol of how special interests are strangling our people. And this body, with this vote, can break that stranglehold symbolically, and in so doing, open us up to taking care of our community and our people in ways that no longer make special interests more important than the public interest. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Sir Nicholas. Speaker Cruz, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And we've been doing this over and over again and expecting a different result. It's not going to happen. Bill 58 says simply, comply with the procurement statute. The author of this legislation understands the procurement statute. He's able to put his career on the line or state that he is because he's looked into this. He's educated himself on this issue. I was procurement chair 7 years ago when the retiring speaker first came on board. But I gave up. It was like herding cats. And trying to get everybody in government to understand the procurement process, my last act was to require that everybody who is involved in procurement had to be trained in procurement. I'm embarrassed to admit that I didn't take my own mandate and follow it. But the author of this legislation sat through 3 modules, one of the first 3 modules up at GCC. To learn about the procurement process. When we had the hearing last week and we talked about this, the superintendent realized the law also requires that he take it. He's on the evaluation team. He should have had it. I'm waiting until October to see whether or not the deputy director of DPW, who's on the procurement, head of the negotiations of this, has taken it. But I know that the author of this legislation has taken that. I also know that the author of this legislation sat through over 3 weeks of hearings to understand why that protest was filed. With all due respect to everybody else, there was no mayor there for the 3 weeks. There was no superintendent there. There was no chairman of the board there. There was no board members there. There was nobody. But I was getting calls from my colleagues in the bar, amazed that a senator would sit from 8 to 4 listening to testimony and taking notes. He read the decision of the OPA in that protest. I don't think the members want me to poll the floor to find out how many people read the opinion in that protest. He has gotten to know people that are involved in procurement. Attorneys that do this on a daily basis, and he understands what needs to be done. And realizes that following the procurement law, doing this with an invitation to bid, as is prescribed in the procurement law, would address this. When we convened the last session, there was another protest. And when I said that we were going to be calling session at 9 o'clock, he asked permission to be absent because he wanted to sit there from 8 o'clock from the start of that protest until the end. He was texting me the whole time. Is there a vote? Is there a vote? Do I have to come back? But he made the effort to understand why this second protest is there and what needs to be done. As a retiring speaker put it, we owe it to the students to listen to the one person that has taken the time to educate himself and to understand the problem and try to find a solution. Because we cannot insanely continue to do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. I ask my colleagues to please vote for the override on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker Cruz. Senator Rodriguez, you're recognized. Then Senator Estes.
Hafaday, good morning, Madam Speaker. Thank you very much. Good morning to my colleagues. You know, on the initial bill, Madam Speaker, I voted against the initial Bill 58 when it was before us. There was certain reasons. There was a couple of reasons, actually, why I voted against the bill. But today, Madam Speaker, I'm choosing progress over perfection. My reasons for voting against Bill 58 were, in my mind, because I think in all of our goal to ensure that what we do, the bills we vote on, are as perfect or near perfect as possible, we vote that way. There was an effort to place a cap on the construction of Simon Sanchez. At that time, Madam Speaker, we knew of 3 proposals, and there were a difference of about 20 million, I believe, from the lowest bidder to the highest bidder, who actually won the bid. And in my mind, that was crazy. Here we are in dire financial straits, and here we are giving a blank check and saying, it's okay, we set aside 100 million, go up to 100 million if you need to build Simon Sanchez, because it's taking so long and we know why we need to get it done. Our kids need a safe facility. However, that amendment failed. And so in my mind, I couldn't support that measure. Another reason, Madam Speaker, is myself with some of my colleagues here, we had an option on the table at that time. Although I must admit this option was clearly an option that was out of the box, an out of the box thinking. It was a real option up to this day, even though I have committed to the Simon Sanchez community that we're going to pull back our efforts to pursue that measure. Up to this point, Madam Speaker, is something that I believe was an option that really made a lot of sense. That we looked at an existing statute and law that allowed us to convert public schools into charter schools because we see the successes. In about a year or so, Madam Speaker, we're going to see a charter school that is being built, not through any bond, not through the backs of our people in having to go out there and borrow money. It's being done through an annual appropriations on what we appropriate for charter schools. But that's something that we rejected. We listened. We listened to the community. We listened to the students over at Simon Sanchez. Although I believe perhaps they weren't provided real good information to help them understand and make a sound a decision. You know, at that time, that's something that, you know, that's now water under the bridge, and we have to do a better job in perhaps selling that proposal if we are to seriously look at that in the future, which, Madam Speaker, I must say, with the other schools that are coming up to the forefront of what needs to be done and the limited resources we have, that out-of-the-box thinking is something we may have to, at one point in time, seriously consider once again. But here we are, Madam Speaker, with this bill, Bill 58, the override of Bill 58. I've said that whether you do an RFP or this IFB that we're proposing, Bill 58 is proposing, we will never be able to assure that we won't have any protests. It will never be protest-proof. That possibility will always be there. However, as I said, if we want progress, if we're really truly going to listen to what our people want, which I've heard over and over again when I went over to Simon Sanchez with the charter school proposal, is fix the procurement system. And as we heard our good speaker, a retiring speaker, speak about the author of this bill, understanding, educating himself, really being involved with the procurement laws, the procurement process, specifically with this project, then, Madam Speaker, I'm going to take that and choose progress. And so I'm asking my colleagues as well, Madam Speaker, to join me in supporting this override. I've always been someone, Madam Speaker, that I've said that if we make a decision, we voted yes on it, voted no on it, I'm going to stick to it. However, I've understand over the years that it doesn't work that way. You know, there's information that comes available. You must be able to listen and understand the situation. And this is one of those cases, Madam Speaker. And so I'm voting to override this veto. Seduce Masi.
Seduce Masi, Senator Rodriguez. Senator Esteves, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Politics, huh? You know, it's interesting. We talk about the procurement as it's this big, bad beast. When this body created the enabling legislation, and as a member of this body, I take responsibilities for the past failures, present failures, and future failures as a member of this body. But let's not forget Public Law 32-120 before we talk and give all these emotions about the students of Simon Sanchez. Let's be realistic here. Now, I won't call out on the record because it's already in record who voted for that Public Law 32-120 and put that in place. And what we got from 32-120 was 3 years of wasted time. And so what I stand here speaking about is what we're saying. We're blaming our own legislation and trying to point fingers. Let's just take responsibility and move on. That's where I stand. We all want to do good for the students of Simon Sanchez, but this political pandering needs to go away. I invite the public, look at the voting record. Look at the people who voted to give us 3 years of wasted time with that first procurement process. You know, I wasn't going to make this comment, but why not, right? This is what political politicians get you. 32-120, people who have no business doing legislation on construction with no knowledge in that area, and gave us 3 years of wasted time and resources. With that, though, I commend the author and the time he's put in on this legislation. And I read it, and I can see he put the time in to understand it. He put the time in to find out what the problems were. And while I personally am so deeply sorry for all the past failures, present failures, and potential future failures of this body, and how it affects the students of Simon Sanchez, I support the author to put his career on the line and stake that claim to that piece of legislation. That's the type of leadership we need in this body, to show he's put that type of work in. But I won't stand for it. Degrading, playing politics. When you look at the enabling legislation, wasn't something that came from the governor's office, wasn't something that came from Adelut, it came from this body. And so I implore my colleagues to support this finely crafted piece of legislation with the override, Bill 58-34, and encourage that in the future, and I've said it before, we take extra care with the legislation we put into office, because about half of the time we've spent in session over the past 5 months has been coming back, correcting problems of the past. And we're never going to move forward if we keep having to fix past problems. So my stance will always be to take our time, do our homework, research, call in experts who know about these different things before we put in law. But the political pandering, let's get some legislation out real quick because the kids need it and the children, and I want to get reelected, needs to stop. And I know I'm probably making a lot of people upset with those comments, but it's coming from the heart. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Estevez. Senator Nelson, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wasn't on island because I was on annual training for this vote. And when I came back, I reviewed the session agenda for the session that I missed, and I noticed that this bill did not pass. And I also wasn't present for the public hearing. So I went in and I tried to read as much as I could, and I finished the committee reports and I finished all the statements. And then I took myself back about 9 months, 6 to 9 months, 10 months, to when the OPA hearings were going on involving Simon Sanchez High School. And I had a distinct interest in this because I'm also an alumni of that school. As a matter of fact, the principal, Ms. Masnayan, she was my teacher, and I gave her many headaches, so I want to thank her for her patience. But the most disturbing thing to me as a constituent at this time, because this was before I became a senator, was that there were so many things that if you were not present in that hearing, you would not completely understand the scope. You would not completely see the fog that was pushed in front of the public. And of course, a lot of this, sometimes there's only a one-sided approach to some of the issues that we face as a body. And today, I'm so grateful that we are hearing this bill, that we are allowing this bill back on the floor after the governor's veto. This is a beautiful thing, that we start to stand together as a body, that we start to fight for what is right. even if it means that sometimes we could be thrown out in the public and, persecuted in a sense. But this bill has a very concrete and true form. And I thank and I commend Senator Atta for this bill. I'm disappointed that the governor vetoed it, but I'm glad we're hearing this as a body today. And I thank all of my colleagues for everything that they have shared and their tenacity and their commitment to the people. So I support this bill, and I urge everyone else to do so as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Is there any other senator who would like to speak on this bill or on the motion? Senator San Augustine, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My colleagues, after listening to Senator Atta, the sponsor of the bill, when we had this session, when we discussed about his bill, the biggest issue I had was putting a cap. My colleagues, I'm from Jigo. My son went to Simon Sanchez. As a matter of fact, before Senator Nelson did. I was on the Board of Education for 6 years. And I kept trying to find ways on the board to fix the schools, especially Simon Sanchez. Even though on the horizon we have GW that's at the breaking point, Ocean View is also, Southern High is on the breaking point. But as Senator Tom Atta had mentioned, this will break the deadlock. And like Senator Snickers brought up, that he put his career on the line. And you know what? I'm going to take faith from that with Senator Tom and say that, number one, you read the books, you checked it out, and I want to get Simon Sanchez fixed. And if this will break the deadlock, then so be it. But I will support Bill 58's override so we can get going on Simon Sanchez, and hopefully the other 34 schools can be addressed immediately. And I hope it doesn't take 18 months to get this done. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. Is there any other senator who wishes to be heard on the motion? If not, is there any objection to the motion? Oh, I'm sorry. Senator Atta, you are welcome to close.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, first of all, I want to thank everyone, all my colleagues who have stood up to state what their position is. But I feel that there are some points that I need to respond to because I think there were significant points that were made. One was the assertion that there has been no consultation with the stakeholders, with DOE, and that up to now, DOE is texting or however they're communicating saying we don't support the bill. Well, here's the kind of outreach that has been made. I personally spoke with the, at the time, acting superintendent, and I explained to him what the process is. I personally spoke to the current chairman of the education board, who kind of summarily brushed me off and said, I'll have the chairman of the subcommittee on finance or whatever call you and sit down and talk to you, because all I wanted to do was to have them understand the minutia, as it's referred to. So that never happened. We never got together because I was waiting for their call. So there has been outreach to the stakeholders. There was a suggestion that this is an 11th hour attempt. It is not. In the 33rd Legislature, there was a bill that was introduced, and it got vetoed. Unfortunately, because it was on the final day of the 33rd Legislature, the veto message was not received until January, and so therefore there was not a 33rd Legislature in existence to try and override it. There was the suggestion that Simon Sanchez High School construction is going to be held back because there is not a capital improvement plan available. That's not the case. We're saying bill is saying, the law is saying, build Simon Sanchez High School and then develop a capital improvement plan for the other 34 schools. With or without a capital improvement plan, Simon Sanchez is to be constructed. A point was made that I had spent 8 minutes, I guess it was time, talking about the minutia of the process. Well, guess what? The devil is in the details. And until you get into the minutia, that is then when you will understand why you will not get the best and the competitive prices from an RFP in comparison to the invitation for bid. You have to get into the weeds to understand that. This little hand, big map stuff just doesn't cut it. That's good on the, on the campaign trail. That's good for rhetoric. But you got to get into the minutia, because that's where the devil is. It is true that the passage of Bill 58 will not guarantee that there's no protests. I just hope that all the creative manipulations, that has been exhausted, and that we won't see that anymore. And if that is the case, we have proposals. There should already be proposals that should be ready, and it's just a matter now of going into step 2 and saying, put your money where your mouth is, submit your price bids, your price offer. And so, one final thing I would just like to do, and that is to summarize. So what does Bill 58 do that changes the face of Public Law 32-120? One is it does not prescribe any particular solicitation method. We don't say, go and use the RFP like 32-120 did. It does not say, go and use the IFB because the governor said that was a violation of the separation of powers. All it says is, solicit in compliance with the Guam procurement law. The second thing that it does is it clarifies what it is that we are bidding on. This thing about a facility or an offer that gives the best value to Guam, and quite frankly, I find it difficult to put my arms around that because it's hard to define what all that is, as opposed to simply saying, in Bill 58, it says that the award shall be based upon a responsive offer. A responsive offer is an offer that is being made by a bidder who has the capacity to be able to deliver, and is submitted by, and that the bid is a responsible offer, and that the bid is responsive. It responds to DOE's specifications, and that he is a responsible offerer because he has the capacity to do that. And so far, the 3 bidders have been determined to be responsible, and their offers were determined to be responsive. And so on top of an education facility that meets the DOE specifications, we will make that award from the bidder who offers the lowest annual lease back rate. So conceivably, you have 3-4 bidders who would offer you an education facility that meets all the requirements. No difference. We're probably indifferent for who builds the school. The difference is only one will offer the lowest annual lease back rent for the fixed term of 30 years. Also, Bill 58 specifically says that the solicitation shall not be combined with other procurements pursuant to Public Law 32-121, because 32-121 says until you have completed a capital improvement plan, that is then when, afterwards, is when you put out a solicitation for the repair of the other 35 schools. So let's not hold Simon Sanchez hostage or delay it further because we're waiting for this capital improvement plan to get done. And finally, a provision that says that no rental payment will be made until and unless the entire education facility has received a full occupancy permit. We just saw a couple of months ago about the DOE facility up at Tizan that has not yet gotten full occupancy, but they're paying rent on it. Thousands of dollars a month. Well, we want to avoid that situation. So you finish the work, give us a completed facility, and then we can start paying rent. So that, my colleagues, is what Bill 58 does, and I urge you to favorably consider the override of this bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator Ada. On the motion to place the vetoed bill number 58-34 COR, notwithstanding the objections of Imagalahin Guahan, into the voting file. Are there any objections? Hearing no objections, the motion carries. Mr. Majority Leader, you are recognized. Would you like? Mr. Speaker, you are recognized.
Madam Speaker, as long as we're in motions, I'd like to make a motion that notwithstanding the veto message of the Governor on Bill 3-34, that Bill 3-34 be placed on the, that we discuss it today and consider its override.
Would you like to discuss? Please proceed.
Yes, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I didn't move for the override of this in the last two sessions since the override because I was waiting to see whether or not what I had informed the body when I initially got Bill 3-34 passed would happen. Well, we've now looked at the I'm sure all of you have seen all of the press releases, and none from me, that all the news media. I heard about the Take Care thing. I didn't realize that the other two insurance companies were also not paid, to the tune of $10 million. Bill 3-34 is an act relative to ensuring that only the most economical and beneficial health care insurance proposal plan for the government of Guam employee, retirees, and foster children is forwarded to the government of Guam health negotiation teams, the Magalahi and Guahan, for consideration and to divest the legislature of any authority to approve the contract entered into. And yes, I'll admit straight up that I and the late Senator Ben were authors of the choice bill. But that was several legislatures ago. I would hope that we, as members of this legislature, are willing to state that we understood that there's a problem and maybe there is a mistake. There is a problem, but I don't believe that it's been a mistake to have that. What we've shown over the last several years has been that this process of having both a single source bid and a multi-source bid has actually resulted in offers being made that would save the government money. All of you saw, and I'm not sure if my staff has circulated it, but it'll be circulated, saw that the negotiating team memos over the years have said, Governor, as you consider the negotiations or the contract in this case, that's being presented to you, please be aware that if you take this option, you will save the government $20 million. Governor, please be aware that if you take this option the following year, was $7 million, $6 million. This last negotiating team memo to the governor said the savings, if you chose the other option, would save $20 million. The previous year when they said 7 million, it was actually short 21 million. Because we had to find 14 million that year to cover it. So there has been it has shown that you can get a lower bid when you have these two things happening at the same time. We now are aware that the foster children contract is 4 months overdue in premium payments, and that the retiree contributions haven't been paid for the last 4 months also. The only letter that I received was from Take Care, which insinuated that the contract allows the discontinuance or of service to a group without violating the contract. And so we've seen that there might be a possibility. Madam Speaker, we had going to lunch, and my colleague here keeps insisting that we have to stop for lunch. At lunch, I would love to be able to every day have the choice of the $45 buffet at Dusitani. Unfortunately, or fortunately, we reduced our salaries the last session. So I'm going to have to make sure that I cut back my budget to make sure that I can address this. So I go to, as my colleague says, to Linda's, or go to the public market and buy my lunch for $8 or $12 because I can no longer afford the $45. Yes, when we had the money, choice was nice. But now our retirees are faced with the possibility that because of choice, they may not have any service, any coverage. We cannot allow that to happen. Last year's memo, and you'll see it in the report, says that had the governor selected the single source, that there would have been a $20 million savings. We don't have enough money to do this. You all sat through the DOE and the UOG hearings last week. DOE is owed $5 million still in cash from last year. And with the allotments that they're getting this year, they're going to be short $10 million probably by the end of this year. UOG was shorted $5 million last year. And when they told us what their allotment was and the number of weeks left, they will be short $10 million by the end of this fiscal year. That $20 million that was presented to the governor by the negotiating team as one of the options, savings, could be used to make the university whole and to make education whole. I implore my colleagues, please, let's realize the time is now to override Bill number 3, and so that when all of you come to me with your, I need more for GPD, or I need more for DOE, or I need more for whatever, that there will be money. We've got to now start looking at other ways to do things. And if amending the law to say that the negotiating team will conclude its negotiations, write its recommendations, and then send to the governor only the most economical, that should be the way that it's handled this fiscal year. And I'm moving this at this time because negotiations begin next week, and I'd like for the negotiators to be able to have everybody know up front that whatever amounts that you're proposing is going to weigh heavily, because now the legislature has stated that though we've got you could submit 2 different bids, that the most economical is the one that's going to be submitted to the governor for his approval. So I'll stop at that, Madam Speaker, because I know everybody's hungry and we still have 2 more bills that have to be addressed, but I just would ask for my colleagues to please join in overriding Bill 3-34, notwithstanding the governor's veto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the motion to place vetoed bill number 3 in the voting file, are there any other senators wishing to speak on the motion? On the motion to place vetoed bill number 3-34 COR, notwithstanding the objections of Imagalahin Guahan, into the voting file. Oh, Senator Rodriguez, would you like to speak? Please proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I arise in opposition to the attempt for the override on Bill 3. I completely understand and appreciate the sentiments and the position of the Speaker, and I believe we had this discussion in the initial discussion on Bill 3 when it was before us. I always enjoy and appreciate the examples that the good speaker provides us, right, about, and he's right. You know, even if we would, we would all like and enjoy that, I think it's more than $44 buffet at Dusit. I think it's $50 or even $60, I think. Because we cut our pay, we have to make those adjustments, right? However, Madam Speaker, I don't see that, I can't see us compare that to the health care of our people. When we know if we had gone to a single exclusive contract for this fiscal year, we would have one party, one insurer that, yes, would have provided significant savings, but would really have put handcuffs on our people in where they would want to be treated, what types of treatment they want. These types of decisions, Madam Speaker, should not be placed on the insurance companies. These decisions, Madam Speaker, need to be put between the patient and their doctor. When they want to get a treatment done at a specific facility, and for us here on Guam, we're very limited. We don't have different choices on where to utilize care. But when a facility is not accredited or not part of that network, of that insurance company's network, that poses a very big problem, Madam Speaker. And so these are the types of problems that, as I've said in the initial discussion of Bill 3, are real life scenarios when it comes down to us going back into the exclusive contract arrangements. So I know that there were other discussions and other ideas that we could explore in moving forward if if the cost is what it is that we're looking at. I mean, there was discussions about perhaps something not popular, but looking at increasing the share of our employees, right, of the members on the premiums, or setting an amount saying 50 million is all we're going to expend for health insurance for this fiscal year, and then have the negotiating team work on a plan that will fit into that amount. So there's all these other options out there that I think we haven't exhausted, that we should be able to look at and explore before moving forward into overriding this veto. So I'm asking my colleagues to sustain this override, this veto. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Rodriguez. On the motion, Senator San Nicolas, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, there's a term I bring up fairly often. I'll probably be bringing it up several more times today. And that term is opportunity cost. And I like to bring it up because we always need to put it into perspective, especially in this subject when it comes to overriding Bill 3 and the opportunity cost of those healthcare dollars. If we had gone with the less expensive option last year and saved 20 million, that's 20 million that could have gone to buy that equipment at GMH that would have saved that 8-year-old's life in that testimony that we received from that doctor the last hearing. If we had chosen the more economic plan for this 10 million, that's 10 million that, if it was available, could have gone to buying more medical supplies for the hospital. Oftentimes we have a tendency to compartmentalize the appropriations that we are considering into the narrow scope of what it is that it's going to fund, without bearing in mind the fact that for every dollar that you put into that narrow scope is a dollar that you weren't able to put someplace else. And so when you have GMH asking for subsidies, asking for resources to be able to provide life-saving services for our people at our hospital, we need to find money for that. And so when we have the competing question of, well, are we going to pay more for a more robust health insurance plan that's going to provide for all these different options and it's going to be more expensive, or are we going to provide for one that's the most economic and beneficial so we can free up the money to be able to fund those other healthcare needs? Those are the kind of things that we need to be mindful of when we're deciding how to vote on these measures. And it transcends the bigger picture. It's across the board when we talk about these things. It touches every single appropriation that we make. Every dollar that we put in one place is a dollar that we did not put someplace else. So when it comes to overriding Bill 3, I rise in support of it. It definitely will be an adjustment if it does get overridden. But I really believe that our negotiating team that we put our faith in to negotiate our insurance options is going to be able to mitigate that as much as possible as well. I mean, that's why we've created that mechanism. I also believe that when all the moving parts come together, particularly when it comes to health insurance, there's several things to take into consideration, and it's not just the health insurance company, but it's the providers. If you were to go with a single health insurance company, if your provider does not want to work with that health insurance company, then yeah, you may not be able to access them. But from a business perspective, that provider will also not be able to access you as the patient and the customer. And so to create the one-sided view that the patients are the only ones who are going to suffer, no, actually, the providers are also going to have to really weigh whether or not they're going to continue to charge what they charge, or they're going to fit within what they can fit into in order to effectively compete in a less expensive market. The free market works in healthcare too. And so I really believe that if we were to go with overriding Bill number 3, we wouldn't necessarily cut off patients from their doctors. I think that what we would require is everybody who's a part of this bigger healthcare / health insurance picture to come to the table and say, I don't want to lose access to my patients don't want to lose access to their doctors. Health insurance companies do want to be able to compete on a basis of price, as well as providing as much benefits as possible. They are going to want to be attractive. How does all that come together? Well, everybody's going to have to give. Because right now, the only ones that are giving are the ones who are paying this higher cost, which are our taxpayers. And it's coming at the cost of us not being able to fund the hospital that provides medical services to our taxpayers, the schools that educate the students of our taxpayers, the roads that our taxpayers drive on. That is, in a nutshell, this whole big story of opportunity cost. We cannot survive if we dig our heels in and only worry about making sure that our interest in any narrow scope of any single appropriation, that our interest is going to be taken care of, and I'm going to be blind to everything else. Because in a community as small as ours, with resources as scarce as they are, it doesn't work like that. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Nicholas. Senator Esteves, you are recognized on the motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I rise in opposition to Bill 3. While I do commend the author for addressing that there is a problem, and I welcome, regardless of the outcome, I welcome and I'd humbly ask that we work together to try to find more solvency, long-term solvency for this current issue. But it is my personal opinion that this is not it in a nutshell. The bill itself states the most beneficial and economical, but there's not an adequate definition of that. It's something that's very, very subjective. And we talk about healthcare as it's just some money business, as some way to find savings, and we try to compare the healthcare of the employees of Gov Guam versus healthcare going on at GMH, and it's really one and the same. You can't compare a machine or treatment being done at GMH versus getting an x-ray done because you have some pain while you discover a tumor is cancer that could potentially be saved at a cheaper price than them going to GMH, or other health issues that they may discover. But when you look about having the most economical with no accounting for the demographics, no accounting for the population, no accounting for the health of the population that you're serving, and understanding in the network of providers and what services they provide, and all of those things most people in healthcare actually have an understanding of, then what we're going to create is a real big imbalance with the premiums and the copays. And what we know, what's been proven time and time again, the thing that precludes people from getting healthcare is cost. And while if I have the most economical plan, I could see a provider and he could give me an x-ray, for this pain, right? Because I don't know what that is, for this pain that I might be having, that may turn out to be a tumor. But if you jack up the price on the copay that I have to pay, I think I can wait. I could wait another month. I can wait another month. A couple months go by there at GMH. And that's another liability on Gov Guam that we have to take care of. But more importantly, we haven't given that patient, that person and their family the best chance of survival, because we're gonna shirk our responsibility on the front end. So with all of that, having a good grasp of the healthcare systems and having a good grasp of other ways that we can do it, that we can approve on legislation like this, is going to be key. And so again, I commend the speaker. I welcome him to work with me, and I'd love to work with him on future legislation that can solve this problem that he's brought to this body for a longer solution. But at this time, I am in opposition to the veto on Bill 3 for the reasons previously stated. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Esteves. Senator Torres, I recognize, but I'm wondering if we would like to have a break for lunch and come back at 2 o'clock. Is that okay, Mr. Speaker? Senator Ada, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Before we break for lunch, I would like to, if we can, just finish our getting down to where we get to the second reading, And then at that point, I would recommend that we then break for lunch.
All right, well, we still have discussion then on Bill 3. All right, so,
Oh, still discussions?
yes.
Oh, okay. All right.
So shall we continue?
Sure.
All right, without a motion to break for lunch, we'll continue. Senator Torres, you are recognized.
Madam Speaker, if we may, I would like to move to at least break for lunch at this point, and we can return upon your call.
On the motion to recess until 2 o'clock, is there any objection? If not, so ordered. Are you objecting?
Could we move the time? The time up 2 hours is a bit long. Maybe an hour would be more reasonable.
On the motion to recess,
About 1:15 at least, 1 hour from now.
on the motion, are you making a motion to amend the time?
Yes, Madam Speaker, I'm making a motion that we come back
Okay.
at
There's a-
1:15,
There's a
approximately
motion
1 hour
to
from now.
recess until 2, and it's amended to recess until 1:15. On that motion, Senator San Agustin.
Madam Speaker, it's raining out there. Wherever any of our colleagues are going to go eat, it's going to take about 2 hours to get back. Everybody's at lunchtime right now, so I reckon just stay with the 2 o'clock and we'll be okay.
All right, I'm going to call a recess until 2 o'clock. Thank you very much.